Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Gary Lane. Today, Hezbollah keeping up its strikes against Israel, launching more drones and rockets as Israel awaits major attacks from Iran and its terror groups. The Israeli military making it very clear they can strike back hard and fast throughout the Middle East. And while the government of Iran is dealing with battles throughout the region, the people of Iran are looking for freedom and democracy as a growing number of Muslims are coming to Christ. Terrorist plots have reportedly been stopped, including attacks on Taylor Swift concerts and possibly an attempt on former President Donald Trump. Now, 2 suspects allegedly loyal to ISIS are in custody. And a pro football star shares the gospel and tells how he came to the Lord as he's inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame. Those stories and more today on NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin in the Middle East, where Israel is awaiting attacks from Iran and its proxy groups like Hezbollah. But the Israeli military is making it very clear that they can strike back with very quick attacks anywhere throughout the Middle East and go on the offensive if necessary. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell brings us that story.
As Israel prepares for an attack from Iran, Hezbollah drones and rockets injured 19 people and ignited fires across northern Israel Tuesday. Some experts believe Hezbollah may lead the attack on Israel with backing from Iran. On Wednesday, Israel's government released figures on the war with Hezbollah since October 9th. Hezbollah fired more than 7,500 rockets toward Israel, launched over 180 drones. 62 civilians and soldiers have been killed. More than 62,000 have been displaced from their homes, and 98 villages, cities, and towns in the north have been evacuated. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant warned Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah against escalating the war.
From the looks of things, Nasrallah may drag Lebanon to pay heavy prices. They don't imagine what could happen. I guess if they take a look at Gaza, they will understand. But reason doesn't always prevail.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told IDF recruits the nation is ready for whatever action Iran and its proxies might take against them.
I know that the citizens of Israel are on alert, and I ask you one thing, to keep your patience and calm. We're prepared for both defense and offense. We strike at our enemies and are also determined to defend ourselves.
I think the nation has grown in confidence as they've fended off even Iranian attacks with the hand of God behind them. So it's looking better, but the Hezbollah threat, the Iranian threat that we're under right now, has everyone's attention.
Meanwhile, the election of Yahya Sinwar as the new head of Hamas is seen by Israel as a strengthening the relationship between Iran and the Palestinians. While Hamas officials in Lebanon praised his election to head the terror group, Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz posted this message on X. The election of Yahya Sinwar as the leader of Hamas must send a clear message to the world that the Palestinian issue is now completely controlled by Iran and Hamas. Without Israeli action in Gaza, the area would fall entirely under Hamas control. The world must see reality as it is and support Israel, which currently stands at the forefront of the battle against the Iranian and extremist Islamist axis. Sinwar masterminded the October 7th massacre of 1,200 Israelis and the kidnapping of more than 250.
Chris,
New report from the U.S. Director of National Intelligence says Iran has undertaken activities that better position it to produce a nuclear device if it chooses to do so. It added Tehran has the infrastructure and experience to quickly produce weapons-grade uranium at multiple facilities. Gary?
Chris, how does Yahya Sinwar's elevation to being the head of Hamas affect their ties with Iran?
Well, Iran has been the sponsor, along with Qatar, of Hamas for years. They've supplied funding and training. And after Ismail Haniyeh was killed, there were deliberation. Who's going to be the successor? And reportedly, Gary, Sinwar interrupted the discussion and made the statement that any new leader of Hamas needs to be somebody close to Iran. And that apparently put the debate to rest. He got the nod as the successor to Haniya, and this solidifies the relationship with Iran, especially, even though historically, and you know this, Gary, there is a tension, there's a debate between the Sunnis and Shiites, but what brings them together is their mutual hatred for the Jewish people and their efforts to go ahead and destroy the Jewish state. That's what brings them together.
Yes, the old saying is, the enemy, my enemy's my friend. So why do some believe Hezbollah may be the first to attack Israel rather than Iran?
Well, there's a possibility that maybe Iran wants Hezbollah, which is its main proxy in the region, to avoid a direct confrontation with Israel. And Hezbollah is armed and prepared to do so right on the border. You saw in our report how much they've been firing into Israel since October 8th, and it probably feels justified since the Israel eliminated their top commander there in Beirut. But it also, Gary, you know this so well, they really need to weigh their consequences. You know, Israel has been telling them over and over that they could bomb Lebanon itself into the Stone Age. So they should be anticipating any Israeli response for a greater Hezbollah attack could be devastating both to them and even to Lebanon.
And the people of Lebanon do not want war. Correct, Chris?
That's for sure. You know, there was a poster in Beirut not too long ago that said, enough, we don't want war. So a lot of the population of Lebanon really don't like what Hezbollah has done to their country. They really have a stranglehold on it, and they certainly don't want a war that's going to devastate an already failed state.
Chris, there are also reports that Iran may hold off and not attack Israel at all. Does the Israeli government believe that?
Well, I'm sure they're cautious because there are reports coming out like that. It's been reported that behind the scenes there's a lot of diplomacy going on. On the one hand, the United States is reportedly trying to persuade Iran not to escalate the situation. That's been the mantra of the Biden administration, to de-escalate the situation here in the Middle East. On the other hand, we saw just a few days ago that the Russia Secretary of their Security Council visited Tehran, and they may be trying to influence Iran on the other side to restrain themselves and potentially to avoid any disastrous consequences. So we've been hearing kind of these reports for the last several days, Gary, in the sense that, you know, maybe Iran really is going to step back from the brink and not, you know, attack Israel like they did on April 13th with at least 350 ballistic cruise missiles and also UAVs.
Well, there's still a lot of tension there. So how are Israelis feeling now among this ongoing tension, waiting for potentially major attacks?
Well, they're anxious, a lot of anticipation, and I think one of the common questions right now when you go see a friend or an acquaintance, well, what do you think? Is there going to be a war? Now, we know there's a war already, and especially up in the north, but there's really an anticipation about what may happen and when and how big. Somebody said, and not to make light of it, but he said it's almost like a visit to the dentist. You want to get it over, and you want to know one way or the other. But right now, there's this sense of anticipation. But I would say, overall, Gary, people here are resolute and they're determined. And what it reminded some of the Golda Meir quote many years ago, and she said something like this: "We've always said that in our war with the Arabs, we had a secret weapon, no alternative." And so the Jews who have been persecuted for over 2,000 years, who have been slaughtered by millions by the Nazis, have nowhere to go. We have nowhere else to go. So I think that, in bottom line, is Israelis here realize this is their final stand. And despite what Iran is pledging, Hezbollah, they feel the word over here is Am Israel Hai in Hebrew, which means the people of Israel live. And I think that's bottom line what they believe will happen.
And quickly, Chris, how widespread is the prayer movement for Israel right now?
Well, actually, we had David Parsons from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, in our studio just yesterday. And he said, actually, it's an unprecedented movement of prayer in the region, around the world. And he said, there's never been in our generation something in the devil's face, the sort of prayer army that God has raised up for such a time as this. So it's global, it's widespread, standing in the gap for Israel for such a time as this.
Okay, Chris Mitchell from Jerusalem. Thanks as always, Chris, for your insights. Stay safe. We know that many people are praying for you and our staff there in Israel. Well, coming up, even as the government of Iran continues to get involved in battles throughout the Middle East, the people of Iran themselves have a different agenda. They want freedom. And amid all of this, a growing number of Muslims are coming to Christ. I'll bring you that story when we come back. In the midst of wars and rumors of bigger conflicts in the Middle East region, there is some good news. An unprecedented number of Muslims are choosing to follow Christ. And in Iran, 50,000 out of 75,000 mosques have closed, as 80% of Iranians express their dissatisfaction with the government and their desire to see democracy replace it. Appearing on this week's episode of The Global Lane, Todd Nettleton of the Voice of the Martyrs says it's not surprising that Iranians are seeking better lives after 45 years of oppressive Islamic rule.
One of the things that's happened since 1979 is the government of Iran has been the mullahs. It's been the Islamic leaders, and they have made this claim that, hey, we are running our country according to Islamic principles. We're going to follow the Quran down to a T. We're going to run everything in the country just the way Islam tells us to. Well, we're now 45 years into that little experiment, and you have a country with one of the highest drug addiction rates in the world. You have a country where corruption runs rampant. You have a country where more than half the people live below the poverty line. And the people of Iran are looking at this and they're saying, wait a minute, if this is what Islam has brought us in the last 45 years, we're not interested. We want to know what the other options are. That's why so many Iranians, the first step typically is to reject Islam and to reject religion. And many of them have become atheists. But then the second step is, well, wait a minute, what if there is a God? And that is how Jesus is revealing himself. Christian radio broadcast, Christian television broadcast, Christian internet ministries are feeding into that hunger in Iran, and we're seeing this massive wave of people come to Christ.
How's the regime reacting to this? We've heard 50,000 of 75,000 mosques have closed, and I'm sure they aren't accepting that very well.
No, this is not something that is making the regime happy. And really, in many ways, they are seeking to solidify their power and to crush any kind of dissent. And they certainly see the growth of the church. They certainly see Christian evangelism as a form of dissent. That's undermining the Islamic regime. And so you have Christians being arrested, particularly leaders. We have heard multiple stories this year of a Bible study, a home church being raided. Everyone there is photographed. Everyone there is questioned. But then the leader of the meeting is held onto. They are arrested. They are detained. They're put in prison. And so there really is a concerted effort to go after the leaders and the people who are spreading Christianity and inviting other Muslims to come and follow Christ.
And how about relatives, friends, that kind of thing of Muslims who do convert to Christ? Those people are considered apostates, right? Those who do convert. So what happens to them aside from the government?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I've asked that question to Iranian Christian leaders, and one of the factors there, and in most Muslim countries, the first line of persecution is your family. They're the first people who are going to come to you and say, wait a minute, we're a Muslim family. You can't be part of our family if you're not a Muslim anymore. That is less likely to happen in Iran because so many Iranians have rejected Islam, or at least they're open to the idea of rejecting Islam. And so oftentimes rather than your family coming and persecuting you, they come to you and say, well, hey, if that works for you, okay, we're okay with it. We won't bother you. Because again, so many Iranians don't think Islam works. They see what their government has done over the last 45 years. And so they're kind of have the attitude of, hey, if you found something that works for you, if it's Jesus or if it's atheism or if it's whatever, if it works for you, I know Islam doesn't work. So I'm happy you found something that works. So it is different as far as family persecution in Iran from what you might see in Saudi Arabia or what you might see in another predominantly Muslim country.
Well, where else are we seeing explosive Christian growth in the Middle East? Which country excites you the most right now beyond Iran?
As we look across the Middle East, I think of things in Saudi Arabia. The government, certainly in Saudi Arabia, is changing in terms of how it responds to outside influence. There is an effort to sort of modernize the business world. There is an effort to be more friendly to the rest of the world, more open to the rest of the world. And it seems like there is a little more openness to the idea of Christianity coming into Saudi Arabia, not necessarily welcoming it with open arms, obviously, but just the understanding that it could happen, that there could be Christians here, and maybe that's not the worst thing in the world.
So what can Christians worldwide do to help these new believers in Iran and elsewhere, Todd?
I think the first thing that we need to do, that all of us can do, is to pray for them. And I think that's the first thing they would ask us to do as well. There are also ministries like the Voice of the Martyrs that are supporting the church in Iran, that are helping to equip. One of the things you can pray for, and one of the things that Voice of the Martyrs is involved in, is training up leaders. As the church is growing so quickly, one of the first things they need is more leaders. And so helping to identify, helping to train, helping to equip those leaders is a key part of the ministry to support the growth of the church in Iran.
Okay, and we'll keep praying for them as well. Todd Nettleton, the Voice of the Martyrs. Thank you, Todd, for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Also on this week's episode of The Global Lane, an Iranian human rights activist tells us what needs to be done to prevent Iran from spreading more violence throughout the Middle East. And college students get ready to return to campus. Look at what they may find once they arrive. You can see it all on The Global Lane tonight on the CBN News Channel at 8 Eastern. You can also see it on the CBN News app or on YouTube. Still ahead, terrorism plots have reportedly been stopped, and 2 suspects are in custody as they were reportedly aiming for Taylor Swift concerts in Austria, and potentially former President Donald Trump. We'll have that story right after this. In what could have been 2 separate tragedies, officials have stopped a pair of unrelated terror plots. One apparently targeting Taylor Swift concerts in Austria. The other in the U.S. aimed at a number of politicians, including possibly former President Donald Trump. Lori Johnson brings us the details.
Taylor Swift canceled 3 concerts in Vienna this week, citing concerns for safety after authorities arrested 2 suspects in an alleged terror plot against the site.
Taylor Swift Konzerten.
Austrian police taking into custody 2 teenagers suspected of plotting a terrorist attack on the stadium. Those in custody are both Austrian citizens. At least one had recently pledged allegiance to the terror group ISIS after becoming radicalized on the internet.
ISIS is still out there. They are still active. They are still online. They are still recruiting.
A raid of one of the suspects' homes uncovered what appeared to be bomb-making materials, although police said bombs would not have been ready for this week's concert. Austria's chancellor releasing a statement, the situation surrounding the planned terrorist attack in Vienna was very serious. The threat was recognized early, combated, and tragedy prevented. ISIS has not claimed responsibility, but it has been behind attacks at other concerts. In March, gunmen killed 60 people at a theater in Moscow. Meanwhile, in a separate event here in the U.S., officials arrested a Pakistani man with ties to Iran for plotting to assassinate former President Donald Trump and other public officials. 46-year-old Asif Merchant was arrested last month and charged with murder for hire by the Justice Department. A newly unsealed criminal complaint says he sought to murder politicians of both parties, most notably the former president.
charging an individual with ties to Iran who we allege sought to hire hitmen to assassinate a politician or a U.S. government official on U.S. soil.
Prosecutors say Merchant spent 2 weeks in Iran before he flew to the U.S., where he paid people posing as gunmen for hire to carry out the killings.
The defendant met with several individuals in New York who he thought were hitmen, but who were in fact undercover law enforcement officers.
Fox News reports the Justice Department was tracking Merchant and allowed him to enter the country to gather evidence and charge him. He was arrested July 12th, the day before a gunman attempted to assassinate former President Trump at a rally in Pennsylvania. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Coming up, a former football star shares the gospel and tells how he came to the Lord when he's inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame. We'll bring you that story when we come back. One of the newest NFL Hall of Famers shared the gospel message in his acceptance speech. Crowds cheered as inductee Randy Gradishar shared a 4-point message during his enshrinement ceremony. Gradishar, a legendary linebacker for the Denver Broncos in the 1970s, gave praises to his wife and pastor for being key prayer warriors in his life. But he also spoke about receiving the best invitation he has ever had when his Ohio State teammate, running back Archie Griffin, helped to lead him to accept Jesus as his Lord and Savior at the age of 22.
Archie, you were an OSU sophomore at the time when you invited me to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes meeting, the best invitation I've ever had. And at age 22, I received Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior.
Gradishar says despite growing up in church, he didn't sit through a gospel message until going to a Fellowship of Christian Athletes meeting that Griffin invited him to attend. Well, that's it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories you've seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com or talk to us on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Well, we hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day.